so now we're getting into the 2024 rule changes, points of emphasis, and IHSA adoptions. All right, so for this year, for NFHS, at least for Illinois officials, we received our new books. We're on a bi-yearly distribution, so we did get our new books this year. I'm going to quickly go over the new rules that came out from last year. Wasn't any major changes, which was nice. However, this year we do have some minors, and then there's one major rule change. So again, I'm going to go on to an in-depth discussion during this session in regards to the pitching rule and the substitutions during those points of emphasis. So when they come up in the rules discussion, I'll mention them, but then when we get into the points of emphasis, we'll go into the deep dive, as well as the new IHSA state adoptions that we'll have that were released not that long ago. We'll bring those up real quick. Okay, so just a recap of last year's new rules. Gloves, they're allowed to have more than 2 colors. So there's no longer a color restrictions on our gloves. The biggest part of that still remains that you cannot have anything that is ball colored, whether it be the laces, the glove itself, anything like that that would confuse an umpire or a player thinking that the ball was still in the glove. So that part is still out loud. That hasn't changed at all, but we no longer have color restrictions on our gloves. One of the other rule changes from last year was that interference of a fly ball over fair territory will be ruled a fair ball, even if it is then not caught and then falls and rolls foul. So for example, you've got a runner going to first base, the first baseman's running up to make a play on that on a fly ball, and the runner runs into the first baseman in fair territory, and the ball comes down in fair territory, but then rolls foul. That is not a foul ball. That is a dead ball interference because there was an opportunity to make a play on that ball, and it would be an out. So we just rule that will be ruled a fair ball. It just meets more of the criteria from the rules as far as the writing of the rule is concerned. Point 3, jewelry is legal. It's obviously still our umpire's discretion if it is distracting to the players, to the umpire. If you've got something glittering in the sun and it's just reflecting light, you can ask it for it to be removed. But in general now, jewelry is legal as long as we do not deem it dangerous or distracting. And the last part of it, really not too much to do with officiating, more for the scorekeeping purposes. But when scores get reported, or if there is a run differential in your state's postseason assignment process, all runs will be counted in a game that end on a home run. So before it used to be just however many runs you needed to get past it. So if you were down a run, but you scored 3 on a home run, you would only get the 2 that you need to get ahead. Now you would get all 3 based on that home run. So that's a recap from last year. I wanted to bring up, I talked about the rule books. So on the NFHS, they have 2 sites that you're looking to. First one, you have the website. This is where you would go and you would purchase all of your digital publications. I myself use this I have all 3. I've got the casebook, the rule book, and the umpire's mechanics manual that I purchased through this site. I like to have an additional copy other than the paper, just so I have access to it. So this is where you would go. It's allaccess.nfhs.org. That's where you're going to go to purchase that. And then where you would go to view that is actually on their mobile app. Now, you do not do the purchasing through the mobile app. This is just to view the items that you had purchased online. So I wanted to make sure I got that out there, that it can be sometimes confusing. But you're going to use that mobile app, and you can then digitally look at all of your rule books from all of your sports, whatever you've purchased. It's a great feature. I enjoy it. The biggest one that I like to use is the searching for terms. A lot of times we know what we're looking for, fake tag. Well, where in the heck is fake tag? Maybe it's harder for me to find, or I'm not exactly sure what section it's in. You type that into the search bar, and it will list all the different locations in the book that fake tag or whatever it is that you're searching for is mentioned. It's a lot faster way of tracking down exactly where in the rule book you're trying to get to if you don't have a good grounding understanding about where the items might be in a rule book, because it can be quite large, especially in the case of certain sports. Softball's nice, not too bad. Football, insanely in depth and sometimes hard to find things. All right, so there's the book access. Let's talk about this year's NFHS 2024 rule changes. All right, first point, other equipment. That is now, any electronic equipment is allowed to be used for coaching purposes, maybe outside the live ball area. We used to have it where it had to be inside the live ball area. That is no longer the case. So hanging up a camera on, or putting it on a tripod outside the fence, that is perfectly fine and legal, as long as, again, it is only being used, they can be done for recording, but any electronic communication or any electronic devices that is used for coaching purposes still has to be done inside the dugout. So again, the camera and stuff can be on the outside, but if I'm watching a screen, whether it be an iPad or something like that, all of that has to take place inside the dugout. It cannot be done out on the bases. Let's say your first base coach has an iPad and they're doing scorekeeping, and all of a sudden they bring up something and they want to show the runner at first base. That is not allowed. They cannot use electronic devices outside the dugout for coaching purposes. They can, like I mentioned, use it for scorekeeping purposes. So again, if they've got that iPad and they're doing the book out on the bases, and we've seen that a lot over the last few years on an increase, that is perfectly fine to use electronic devices for that purpose, just not for coaching. Something really minor, and it's not until 2027. They have to have the single manufacturer's logo. You can't have messages, slogans, and stuff like that permitted. So the pick on the left, you kick off for cancer or something like that, not allowed, just because everybody will be having that. It could get confusing. It could be their last name and their number is what we're looking for those legal ones. So again, not until 2027. I'm sure it'll come up again in the future. For this year, their head equipment can be different colors. We're not restricting the colors anymore about team colors or anything else like that. The one thing that they still cannot do is have plastic visors or bandanas. Those are still illegal. This one is interesting because I've seen this different numerations about where in the heck players have their play cards. So players obviously more than welcome to have a play card. If they do and they wear it, it must be worn on the wrist or the forearm. See it slid up pretty far. That's fine, as long as it's readable from that. Where they cannot have it is it cannot be tucked in the belt or something like that. If you are not wearing it, that is fine. It is to be tucked into the back pocket, as is shown in picture number B, but it cannot be worn on the belt. The idea here is we're trying to move things along. We want it to be accessible, but it still needs to be worn. Any equipment that's ever worn is supposed to be worn legally. So we have to make sure that a wristband is worn on the wrist. Again, further up the arm, not a huge deal, but just not on the belt. That's one of our thing there. If it is worn, also it has to be on the non-pitching arm. Again, that plastic, the sunlight, who knows if you get that reflection, but the rule for us is the non-pitching arm, and most pitchers do that anyways. So basically their glove hand is the idea there. Love the picture on this one. Obviously, it depends on where you're at. So some of our national umpires that might be tuning in from places other than Illinois, this may have quite a bearing on that. But if you have an in-game procedure, such as seen in the picture, or some other things that would be deemed unsafe or unacceptable due to safety, the plate umpire has the right to cancel that game. So we'll get into a little bit more than the points of emphasis for this year. Okay, again, I'm not going to go deep into it now. We'll get into the points of emphasis. But for this year, this is our major rule change for our pitching regulations. A pitcher is now allowed to have both feet off the ground. So we no longer have to have the pivot foot touching the ground or the drag or anything like that. Both feet can now leave the ground in that pitching process, which is fine as long as both feet remain inside the 24-inch zone. One of the terms that they've now done at the bottom here is where they said that Replant has now essentially replaced the crow hop as far as definitions. So you will not find crow hop anymore in our definitions, and we shouldn't be using it anymore in our definitions as far as when we have discussions. We're just calling that a replant. But it's important to understand what exactly a replant is. And again, I will get more into that in the point of emphasis, but the bottom line for right now, the short-term discussion is a replant is not when the foot comes down. Just because the foot touches the ground, we don't necessarily have a replant. It has to be where we're pushing off someplace other than the pitcher's plate. And we'll get into that in a second. Other infractions would be sometimes when a substance is applied to the ball. So players are always allowed to take some dirt off the ground, some chalk off the ground. That's fine, as long as they're not discoloring or defacing the ball. That is not a problem. As far as other drying agents are concerned, you see the pictures there in picture C. Talks about the Gorilla Gold. For softball and stuff like that, that's perfectly legal, as long as it is not discoloring or defacing the ball. What is not legal is sometimes we can see confused just by those two Gorilla Gold. The softball one's legal, but the golf one is not. So we're just making sure that if they are using Gorilla Gold or something similar, that is the appropriate usage. Umpires, if you have any questions on this, just ask to see it. You can check it out. You don't have pregame is great for this. If you happen to see it sticking out of their back pocket, if you see an umpire go to their pocket to wipe their fingers on something and then go right to the ball, we want to make sure that it's definitely legal to begin with. But understand that there are legal substances that we are allowing to be applied, such as the Gorilla Gold. But again, that's for softball or the original Gorilla Gold, but not for golf because it's an entirely different substance. If you ever have any questions, you can check out the USA Softball Certified Equipment List. And then the listing for that will tell you exactly what is legal. All right, so points of emphasis. So here's where we're going to spend a lot of our time, at least in this first section. One of the points of emphasis this year, again, was the in-between innings as far as the timing is concerned. So our rules and our recommendations say that we're trying to limit it to 60 seconds in between innings. Again, this starts usually when the defense starts to leave the field after the last out is made, and then 60 seconds until we say play ball and the first pitch of that next inning is delivered. Obviously, there's going to be things that can affect that timing, whether it be substitutions. Maybe it's a really hot day and you want to give a longer break, water break for yourself or for the players. That's perfectly fine. But the goal is to try to keep that to 60 seconds as best we can. How we approach that is with professionalism, making sure that we're moving everybody in, everybody out. If you've got those teams that love to come off the field and then they're on offense now and they're huddling outside their dugout and they just take a really long time and they haven't got to get their bats or their helmets yet. Just kind of nice gentle reminders of, hey, you guys are up. Let's get a batter going. Let's get somebody ready. They're still more than welcome as long as they're doing it safely and underneath that minute. But the end goal of this is to make sure that we're moving and having a nice pace to our game, that things aren't being drawn out. You would be surprised how often, if we can chop 30 seconds off in one section, 30 seconds off another, how much time that actually saves us in a game. Instead of going 2.5 hours, now we're under 2 hours or maybe an hour 45 on a long game, right? It's a little bit more manageable. All right. Next one, again, I talked about this earlier with the unacceptable conditions with the safety. Our jurisdiction is limited to the field. It does not start until we say play ball. So everything outside of that is always done by the host school, the AD, whatever the case is. But we assume responsibility as soon as that game gets going, right? We want to work with our teams. We want to work with our coaches and everything else. Obviously, if we have as in this picture, an exceedingly unsafe situation, we would have to be able to make the call with all parties involved. But we do have that jurisdiction in order to do so, wherever it might be. So, take a look at that. It was in your, I know in the video that we had sent out from NFHS at least for IHSA, for our rules video that we had to watch, it mentioned this, as well as in our guide that we got in the preseason. So, all right, let's move on to a larger topic. So there's one slide here, and then I'm going to go into a little bit more in depth on this, unreported versus illegal substitutions. This is the NFHS slide that was sent. I made some more to kind of go a little bit more into depth. But the idea here is that we've got two different types of substitution, and the penalties or the how we get from point A to point B is very different when it comes between these two. The idea being is that an illegal substitution is, again, just that player that's not eligible to play, in whatever context it may be. The unreported sub is you have a person that's legal, they just didn't tell you. So this is that first slide. Let's go ahead and get into it here. So again, this is one of those things where a lot of coaches and a lot of officials confuse these two definitions just because they're right next to each other in the book. And, they say that's an illegal sub, and then you have to let them know it's just really an unreported sub. It is our point of emphasis here, I feel, for that very reason. And it's going to behoove yourself to really take some time to make sure that you understand how the difference of these two rules are applied and where they come in and where we see them the most often. Okay, substitution basics. Every player has one reentry. That is for all starters and all bench players. Doesn't make a difference where you are where the game goes. You have one reentry. By that, I mean if you leave the game, you can come back once. So starters, they're already in the game. They can leave the game, come back once. Substitutes haven't been in the game yet. Once they become a legal substitute and enter the game, then they leave, they then have that one re-entry available to them. Do yourself a favor on your lineup cards. Make sure we're marking things correctly. However it is that you mark them, I've seen a variety of options, but for me, I like to do the circle and then the following one line and then two lines to cancel them out. So the idea is that whatever indications you're using, if you have noted that they have left the game for a second time, they are done for the day. Additionally, making sure that we understand our DP flex rules. For the player that only plays defense, being the flex, or the player that only plays offense, being the batter, they are still considered in the game when a fielder on their team is at bat or on offense. So the idea there is like if I have my flex, right, and they're going to come in they're going to bat for the DP. That flex has never left the game. Granted, we're not on defense, but just because they're batting doesn't mean they've left the game. The DP, who has that role, yes, if they were no longer in the batting order, they would have left the game. This also occurs when a batter is just on the field when a batter when their team is in the field or on defense. So for example, the DP is going to go and play the field for somebody, but it's not the flex. That is perfectly fine. That player just becomes a batter in the lineup. The lineup hasn't changed. They haven't left the game, but just because they're not playing defense doesn't necessarily mean that we've removed them from the lineup. And this almost always occurs in this situation where the DP flex is being used. If you have the straight 9, you wouldn't have any of those situations. Okay, the process that we're hoping people are following is that a substitute player or their coach is going to take a second and let the home plate umpire know, hey, I'm coming in for so-and-so. Hey, Susie, this number 12 is going in for number 3. This happens when a player comes in for the game for the first time, when they're re-entering, so I'm going to re-enter 22. You'll hear that. If there's a change in the DP flex, we're going from 9 to 10 and vice versa. or if we're using a courtesy runner. Now, that is not technically a substitution. We're not having a player enter the game as a substitute, but it is still something that follows that rule as far as reporting is concerned, so it falls under the substitution process. Whatever it is that you're getting told, take your time to write it down. So many times you get this, 12 is going to run for 3. Okay, coach, thanks. And I'll see a partner not write down anything, right? Take your time, write it down, because this is where we get ourselves into trouble, is by not making proper notations later in the game when we're like, oh, wait, what was it? I can't remember now. We want to make sure anytime there's a substitution, even courtesy runners, take a second to write it down. That report, once you get that reported to you as a home plate umpire, it is then your responsibility then to carry that information and report it to the opposing head coach. Sometimes that head coach is out on the bases or busy with a player, so you report it in the direction of the head coach, then usually towards whoever is keeping the scorebook. But the idea is the rule book states that it needs to be reported to the head coach of the opposing team. Projected substitutions are not allowed. So what I mean by that is if something hasn't happened, it's upcoming. So for example, teams on defense, and they're saying, hey, for my second batter next inning, I'm going to bring in so-and-so for so-and-so and do a pinch hit. That's great, coach. I appreciate that. But do me a favor, I need to be told when that happens. At that point, then I'd be happy to take that substitution. That's the kind of approach we want to take for those projected subs. We're not trying to tell them flat out no. We just handle the situation kindly and just remind them, hey, please remind me later on when it comes up, because that the coaches technically are, they can make a decision to change it or whatever, which is why we don't want to take the projected sub, because if we write it down and they change their mind, then the whole argument becomes, well, wait, did that substitution take place or not? We don't want to go down that road. So just do yourself a favor, don't take projection subs, remind the coach, remind the players, hey, just tell me when it happens. That's the time to get it done. All right, so in that particular case, let's say you had one of those, and then the person then just literally forgot to tell you, hey, I'm going to substitute in for this player. When a substitute forgets to inform the home plate umpire, they are considered to be in the game in any of those situations. I'm not going to read them all. But whenever, that's like the timing of it, when they're considered to be in the game for those points in time. The idea there is that that is a legal substitution that just is unreported. So as long as they're able to do whatever it is that they said they didn't tell you that they were going to do, as long as it's legal, you're okay. It's just considered an unreported sub. So that's where we're going to have the difference here of the legal unreported sub and illegal unreported sub. So let's just stick with the legal stuff. They just forgot to tell you, but everything is okay. If it's then found out, we're going to give that team a warning. So again, let's say number 12 goes up to bat for number 6, and you weren't told. They get on base, and then the opposing coach comes out with their book and is like, I want an out because they batted out of order. And then you find out that 12 batted for 6, and it was just not reported to you. It was a legal sub off the bench. Everything was fine. It just wasn't told to you. There's no penalty here. It is a simple warning. I shouldn't say no penalty. There is a penalty. It's just nothing that affects the game right now on that first one. So we give that warning. We let the coach know, hey, coach, that this is your warning. Nothing else is going to happen. No out, nothing. However, we do want to remind the coach and possibly the players as well that any further unreported subs then will start to affect the game and the players' availability. So that's usually the sign of a coach really wants to make sure that any time a substitution happens after that he is all over it, he's well aware of the situation, and it helps to clean things up. So if you happen to have a second offense or more, heaven forbid, I'm trying to think of myself. I've rarely had a second offense because most of the time they understand what's going on. That coach and the offender then are going to be restricted to the bench for the remainder of the game. There's still no out. It's not like the batting out of order penalty. We do not have an out in this situation. We just need to fix the situation. So if I have a second unreported sub, that unreported sub would not be ruled out. They would just be taken off the bases. They didn't report in, or let's say they're playing the field. Either way, they would go back to the dugout and be restricted. As long as they have substitutes to continue to replace that player, and then they tell you about them, you're fine to keep going. So there's no outs on unreported subs. The only penalty that would occur is on the second warning, we then restrict coach and said unreported sub to the bench. Let's move on to the illegal substitution part of this. All right. I maintain that if you have a good lineup card, most of your illegal substitution chances will be undone by your observations. When you're working with a card and you know that this is not going to work, you can then work with the coach and tell them, hey, I can't do that substitution. It would be illegal. Let's find a different option for you. You're not trying to coach them up, but ask questions, try to figure out what's going on. Don't assume that every substitution is legal. That's why I talk about writing it down. You take it out, you go and you look up number 12 and you realize, wait, that person's burned, is done for the day already. I cannot put this person in. And they said, hey, I want to have number 12 go back again. Like, nope, they've used their re-entry. They came out a second time and they're done. You need to find another player coach. You just prevented an illegal substitution from happening. You're not telling them what player to put in. You're not, coaching them in any way, but you're preventing this situation from going down. And just keep it simple. If the coach asks, hey, am I allowed to do this? Yes, you are allowed, or no, that would be an illegal substitution. Keep it nice and easy. The different types that you might see on this kind of thing is, again, the most common is when they re-enter, they come in without the eligibility to do so. So they've burned their re-entries, that kind of stuff. Maybe they came in and they re-enter the game in the wrong batting order. So, they number 12 for number 6. So 6 comes out, and then when 6 comes back in, they'd go in for number 3 in the wrong spot, right? That would be an illegal substitution because they cannot bat in a different spot than what they were originally designed for. The flex comes in and plays offense, whether it be running or batting for somebody other than the DP, or if a player violates the courtesy runner rule. For us, for NFHS, we remember that our courtesy runners, you have to have 1 for the pitcher and 1 for the catcher. You cannot run for both. Okay. Again, I'm not going to go heavy into this penalty because, like I said, as not often as I've had the unreported sub, it happens every once in a while. I've had even less illegal substitutions. Again, this is by maintaining a good lineup card. All right. So again, if I've got something going on, it always is going to result in a restriction to the bench. That's always going to happen. It depends on defense or offense, whether or not we have outs involved and other penalties, which I'll get into in the next few slides. But that always takes precedence over the batting out of order penalty. So, because we've got that restriction that's coming. Because batting out of order doesn't necessarily mean I'm putting somebody on the bench. This does. So illegal substitution takes that precedence. If it is discovered while the offense is at bat, while it's at bat, the illegal substitute's going to be out. Then we put the next proper batter. The proper batter that was supposed to be up has lost that at turn, and we just move to the next person in the lineup. That's probably the easiest one as far as on offense goes for illegal substitution. I'm not going to get too heavy into this. The idea being here is always before or after the next legal pitch. If I catch things before the next legal pitch, on offense, we're going to have an out. We're going to put them back on the bench, that kind of stuff, so that they get on base. We're going to pull them off the base. It's going to be an out. We just move on. If we've found stuff after the pitch, though, right, we still will have an out if they're on the base, and we're still going to restrict, but everything else will stand. So the idea there is illegal substitutions, we're trying to catch them before that next pitch occurs. Again, I'm trying to stop it from even happening in the first place on my lineup card. That's a good filter there, but it could still happen. Again, now this is the defensive slides. It's a lot of words. I don't want to regurgitate this all to you. Check out 343 in your rule book. It's all about the timing again. Before the pitch, before the batter, when the batter gets on, if the illegal substitute was involved in the play or not, that's what this whole rule goes down. It's wordy, it's long. I was having struggle trying to figure out how I wanted to present this. I'm like, well, I'm going to put it in the slide, and I'll leave it up to you to read it basically and check out your rule book. But again, illegal substitutions, just wrapping it up. The idea here is find a system that works for you, and then if it's an unreported sub that was a legal move, you're fine. Just give the warning, tell them, hey, don't do it again, and you're good to move on. And then illegal substitutions can be prevented by using those good lineup cards and having knowledge of those rules. The most common, I guess I would say, for those illegal substitutions would be the unreported illegal substitution, right? They come out, they don't tell you that, so first off, you've got an unreported, but it elevates to an illegal when they're doing something they're absolutely not supposed to do. Take your time with these. Don't rush them. You just want to try to prevent further issues from popping up. They can be confusing when you get both books together and you're trying to get everybody on the same page. So my hope for you is that illegal substitutions are far and few between, as they have been for me. Unreporteds pop up a little bit more often, but they're way easier to handle, and coaches are usually pretty good after the first one because they don't want to get restricted. They don't want their players restricted. They want their full team. Okay, so that does it for our unreported versus illegal update. Now we're going to move into that new pitching rule. Big thing here is to spend some time in Rule 2 and understand that many of the definitions have been changed in regard to this rule. So much so that all of the, because it was such an early part in Rule 2 with our definitions, that everything now has a new number. You'll see that in the shaded sections of your book where things are highlighted, that now all that stuff has changed. So if you were memorizing rules or quoting off rule numbers before, almost all of those numbers have now changed in Rule 2. Moving into foot basics as far as this particular rule is concerned, again with both feet being allowed to leave the ground. That part's legal and we don't have to worry about that anymore. If that pivot foot returns to the ground prior to the release of the ball, it is not automatically a replant by definition. Again, that's why I put it in quotes. Quotes, meaning that the replant has replaced that definition of a curl hop, and it's where a new push-off will occur. And I've got some video / more explanation on that. But this is where we're going to have the most contention with coaches about this rule, is they're going to see that pivot foot come back down to the ground prior to the ball being released, and they're going to argue that that is a replant. That is not the definition of the word. I understand, like, you think about replant, it sounds like, oh, I'm putting my foot back down. Yes, but in the softball terms of things, in our definition terms of things, a replant is defined as a new point that the pitcher is pushing off of. Okay, so again, I'm bringing back this thing, this one from the NFHS as far as the rule change goes, but that second point that I wanted to bring up, and I highlighted it in red, that a replant of the pivot foot occurs when the pitcher pushes off of a playing surface from anywhere other than the pitcher's plate prior to the act of delivering a pitch. In my, I've got 20 years now in softball, and I know many of you that are watching this probably have more than that. The abilities of softball players at the high school level are not as high as college and professionals and stuff like that. For them to be able to get their foot back down after leaving the air, putting it up in the air, getting it back down, and still having enough force to push off a new spot just didn't happen before, because that was the definition of the curl hop. Most often we saw the leap. That's what it was. And now the leap is legal. As a matter of fact, that's been removed from the book. You won't find it anymore because it is a legal method of pitching now. Okay. Again, here's our replant again. It's a legal action. So by replanting would be illegal. And I got one video on this second point where it's where they slide that foot forward. So that we've seen, and that continues to be illegal. That was illegal before, and it's illegal still, where that pivot foot pushes off forward onto the dirt. So now we're no longer in contact with the pitching plate, and we're pushing off from that new spot closer to home. All right, so I have a video that I would like to play directly from the NFHS for the point of emphasis. This gentleman did a great job of breaking it down, so we're going to let him go ahead and do that. Tim, if you want to activate the audio for that.
This video will examine a pitch where the pitcher has both feet disengaged from the playing surface at the same time. Rule 247 covers a replant. A replant of the pivot foot occurs when the pitcher pushes off the playing surface from anywhere other than the pitcher's plate prior to the act of delivering the pitch. Rule 612C. While pushing off from the pitcher's plate, both feet may be disengaged from the playing surface as long as they remain within the 24-inch width of the pitcher's plate and do not create a replant of the pivot foot, resulting in the pitcher being farther away from the pitcher's plate. Pushing off with the pivot foot from a place other than the pitcher's plate, resulting in the non-pivot foot becoming closer to home plate, is illegal. Key points from these rules. Rule 247, prior to the act of delivering the pitch. And Rule 612C, does not create a replant that moves the pitcher farther away from the pitcher's plate or pushes off from a place other than the pitcher's plate, resulting in the non-pivot foot becoming closer to home plate. Now let's step through this pitch. At this point, the pitcher has started their pitch. Their hands are separated, while the pivot foot is still in contact with the pitcher's plate. Items to consider. Did the pitch start while the pivot foot was still in contact with the pitching plate, and both feet were within or partially within the 24-inch length of the pitcher's plate? In this case, the answer is yes, and the pitch started legally. The pivot foot is in contact with the ground prior to the non-pivot foot. This is not an illegal action. The umpire must judge that the pivot foot pushes from this point, resulting in the non-pivot foot becoming closer to home plate for an illegal pitch to be ruled. The umpire must judge if the actions of the pivot foot affect the travel of the non-pivot foot, or does it continue on the same path, making this action legal. Or does the pivot foot push from this point, moving the pitcher forward, resulting in the non-pivot foot becoming closer to home plate, which would make this pitch illegal. We must determine if the pivot foot pushes from somewhere other than the pitcher's plate, resulting in the non-pivot foot becoming closer to home plate. In this case, it does not, which makes that action legal. The non-pivot foot is in contact with the ground. At this point, it is impossible for the non-pivot foot to become closer to home plate unless it is lifted again. Once the non-pivot foot has landed and the forward motion to release the ball has started, the pitcher is considered to be in the act of delivering the pitch. Once the non-pivot foot is on the ground and the pitcher is in the act of delivering the pitch, the action is legal. At this point, the pitch has been released and no further actions by the pitcher's feet could result in an illegal pitch. Since both feet are within or partially within the 24-inch length of the pitcher's plate when the ball is released, this is a legal pitch. This is a full-speed replay. This replay is at half speed. This pitch should be ruled legal as no part of the pitching rule was violated. There was no replant of the pivot foot resulting in the pitcher being farther from the pitcher's plate. The pivot foot did not push from any place other than the pitcher's plate, resulting in the non-pivot foot becoming closer to home plate.
Okay, so just kind of recapping the video, there was a lot thrown in there. After speaking with the IHSA head of softball and our head clinician, the message that was asked to be sent out to the officials for this clinic, as well as the whole state of Illinois, was that we are basically asking our base umpires to not call illegal pitches. The only thing that you would have would be our plate umpire with the 24-inch zone and possibly the hands and the licking, licking of fingers and things like that. But in regards to the leap, we should see a dramatic drop-off in illegal pitches being called from the bases, if not all entirely. If you have one of those where the pitcher is able to get that foot down and then push off again, okay, send me a video. Send the IHSA a video. We don't have a lot of video on that simply because the girls are not skilled enough to get that foot down and that second push off to occur. But in regards to this, again, the biggest argument you're going to hear from coaches is when that foot gets down until they get used to the rule. That pivot foot gets down, and then they're going to say that they pushed off from a new spot. That's up to you to determine that. But the key, as was done in the video, was talked about how the non-pivot foot is it going even further forward. So as long as it's following that trajectory and not doing a little small of a hiccup, maybe a little bit of a bunny hop, something like that, you will have a legal pitch in regards to when the feet leave the ground. The other question I've got a couple times is, well, is it still legal to pitch the old way? Absolutely. If the pitcher still wants to drag her foot, she's been doing that for years. Yeah, she hasn't violated any of the rules. As a matter of fact, she's more than well within those rules. The biggest part about it, though, is that replant, re-push off. Again, and that's the part we have to see, and it's just not going to. We feel that as far as base umpires are concerned, we should be able to concentrate a lot more on the interaction around the plate when the pitch is occurring, and the runners that are on the bases, instead of pulling a lot of our focus towards watching for those illegal pitches in the past. So hopefully that gives our base umpires a little reason to celebrate, a little less for them to watch. What I did also want to show is there's no video or there's no audio on this, but of a video. So here's that mechanics again. In A, the green, perfectly legal, where again we come off the ground, I land, and that's it. It's when I'm giving myself that forward advantage, so I replant my pivot foot and I push off again, and then that non-pivot foot now lands even closer to home. Again, you'll see a little hiccup maybe in the knee or something like that. Would be the idea there to tell you, hey, that's the giveaway. But again, just because a foot comes down does not mean you have an illegal pitch. So make sure you're getting that into your resume as far as what you're looking for, what you're not looking for. I think as the season goes along, everybody will kind of settle into this, and it'll be a lot better for everybody because now we're not micromanaging some of our rules that we used to have in the past. So it's great to see this change. I'm all for it. I'm glad the sport has gone this way. Gets us to our focus to where we really need it to be during the game. This video clip, no audio again, but it will kind of demonstrate that slide forward we talked about. This is still illegal, and I'll go ahead and play this real quick. So we start with the back heel of that pivot foot on the rubber, but as we move forward, you can see that back heel is about 6 inches now in front of the plate. That is a distinct advantage because now I've shortened that distance to home. We have no part of that pivot foot pushing off of the pitcher's plate as the pitch is delivered. So this is part of that illegal portion of it where we are sliding forward and pushing off of a point that is not the pitcher's plate, and that is still illegal. So that is definitely something our base umpires still want to watch out for. But that's real easy to see simply because you'll see dirt between the heel and the rubber. Work with your pitchers. Let them know, hey, slide your foot back a little bit. If you see this in pregame, it gives you a great opportunity to kind of preventative maintenance as you want, preventative officiating it. Go out there and say, hey, I can see your foot sliding forward when you pitch. Do me a favor so that you're still in contact when that process begins. You just slide your foot back so when you slide forward, then you're still above the pitcher's plate pushing off of that point. That's the idea we would like our pitchers to be at if they're using this form. What we don't want to see is this, where they put just that back heel on, then they come forward, and now we're pitching off at a new point, not in contact with the pitcher's plate. So that brings us, I think that's, oh, we got our IHSA conditions. So I just wanted to go over this. This is, again, for the IHSA state. I'll make this super quick. One of the things that they mentioned now is that they've basically lengthened out or redefined how the weeks of the playoffs will be run as far as like the days. So there's the idea here is this has really nothing to do with the officials, but there's more flexibility within the assigning schools as far as what days playoffs can happen and occur. The typical times were Tuesday, Wednesdays, Saturdays, or Tuesday, Wednesday, Fridays. We might see some changes depending on home graduations or homecomings or whatever the case is. It gives schools during those playoff rounds a little bit more flexibility to get stuff done. But the main key here is that no game will still cannot begin on a weekday before 3 p.m. As far as the tournament structure goes at the end of the year, when we get to those last couple of games for the tournament championships, again in the IHSA, we've got some times shifted back to allow more flexibility for our teams between games and to get off the field, on the field. So again, that'll only affect the state tournament. Walk-up music. So this is something I mentioned. I get asked this question a lot, like during the regular season versus the postseason. During the regular season, we don't have a rule in place as far as the IHSA is concerned with their walk-up music. Teams will be allowed to use that as long as you can communicate to your players and coaches during that time. I've sometimes had to ask my teams to turn it down because it's awfully loud. It's hard to understand substitutions. But for the most part, they're allowed to have their music in the regular season. However, when it gets to the state series, so once we get into the playoff mode, okay, walk-up music is no longer allowed. In between innings are fine as long as, again, it's not loud or so loud that we can't hear ourselves think. But the walk-up music when players are coming to at bat is not allowed in the state series. And all artificial noisemakers, again, during the state series, not during the regular season, but during those state series, those are not allowed. Any of those things can be found on the IHSA terms and conditions page. And then this part, they talk about this contest limit. You can't have more than 35 games as a school, or a team cannot participate in more than 35 games. Officials, heaven knows, we usually end up way more than that in a season. All right, so I'm going to put it back to that. So before we move on to our next section,